Hello, everything. Good day to all of you, my dear students. My name is Beverly Faye Filomeno from BSED English 4A. I am your student teacher for today. Before anything else, let's have a prayer. Anybody, please lead a prayer. Okay, thank you. So, before we proceed, allow me to set some rules. First, turn off your microphone when the teacher is talking. Yes, that is to avoid distraction and unnecessary noises. Next is turn your cameras on whenever you are called. All right, that's because we will be having a question and answer portion as we go along with our discussion. So, listen attentively and might as well take down some notes. By the way, I will give some additional points to those students who are on time. And lastly, before we end our class, I want you to turn your cameras on as well for the final attendance. Okay, so are you ready to learn? All right. So let's begin with a quote. Read with me. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. As you read the quote, what is the first thing that comes into your mind? Perfect. The quote is somehow similar to John Dewey's belief, wherein he emphasized learning by doing, which means that everything is passive unless they experience it. Now, who can guess this picture? Correct. What a brilliant student I have. He is Confucius. He is one of the prominent philosopher in the history of China. Where do you think he is from? Absolutely. He is from China. Now, let me introduce to you our topic for this day. It's Chinese literature. In this topic, the students will be able to trace the history of Chinese literature from Shang Dynasty to modern period, construct an analysis based on the selection given, write a critical analysis paper using at least one literary theory, appreciate the value of Chinese literature in the modern world, and analyze a literary piece in terms of author style, values, lessons, and impact to the reader. So let's trace the historical background of China. Chinese literature reflects the political and social history of China and the impact of powerful religions that came from within and outside the country. Its tradition goes back thousands of years and has often been inspired by philosophical questions about the meaning of life, how to live ethically in society, and how to live in spiritual harmony with the natural order of the universe. As we knew that China is known for their dynasty, and there is Shang, the first dynasty of China. During this time, the people practiced a religion based on the belief that nature was inhabited by many powerful gods and spirits. Among the significant advances of this period were bronze working, decimal system, a 12-month calendar, and a system of writing consisting of 3,000 characters. The next dynasty is the Chu dynasty. This is the longest dynasties of all. Most of this period China suffered from severe political disunity and upheaval. This era was also known as the Hundred Schools period because of the many competing philosophers and teachers. Among those influential philosophers are Lao Tzu, the proponent of Taoism, and Confucius, the founder of Confucianism, wherein Lao Tzu stressed freedom, simplicity, and the mystical contemplation of nature, whereas Confucius emphasized a code of social conduct and stressed the importance of discipline, morality, and knowledge. The next dynasty is the Qin dynasty. In this period, China was being unified and the central government has been strengthened, which leads to the formation of the Great Wall of China. The next dynasty is the Han dynasty, which is the most glorious eras of Chinese history because Buddhism was introduced from India. The next dynasty is the Tang dynasty. Tang dynasty is known to be the golden age of Chinese civilization. Among the technological advances of this time were the invention of gunpowder and the block printing. The next dynasty is the Song dynasty. In this period, China was characterized by delicacy and refinement. Professional poets were replaced by amateur writers, and the practice of Neo Confucianism grew. All right. The next dynasty is the later dynasty. In this dynasty, China was being invaded by the Mongol led by King Genghis Khan. And there's his son Kublai Khan who completed the Mongol conquest and successfully developed the first foreign dynasty, which is the Yuan dynasty. However, Chinese did not give up. Not long after, they successfully driven Mongols out of China and Ming dynasty was established. Because there was a growth of drama in colloquial language, the second foreign dynasty has been made, and that is the Qing dynasty, which made China prosperous. In this time also, population rapidly increased, causing major problems for its government. The last dynasty, or the modern world, is the traditional Chinese government. The imperial rule lasted in China for over 2,000 years, leading to a pyramid hierarchy in the government. An official government career was considered prestigious. There are many famous Chinese poets also served in the government, which is why most government officials were well versed in literature and philosophy. Now, questions. If you have any question, then you can open your mic and express it. If not, then I will be the one to ask and pick random students to answer my question. Okay, anybody? So allow me to ask, what dynasty that is known to be the golden age of Chinese civilization? Okay, let me choose one student. Perfect. Tang dynasty is the golden age of Chinese civilization. Now let's proceed with the next topic, that is poetry. Poetry has always been highly valued in Chinese culture and was considered superior to prose. Its chief characteristics are lucidity, brevity, subtlety, suggestiveness or understatement, and its threefold appeal to intellect, emotion, and calligraphy. So, these are the genres in Chinese poetry. There are six principal genres in Chinese poetry. The first one is Shi. Shi was a dominant in Chinese poetic form from the 2nd through the 12th century, which is characterized by an even number of lines, same number of words in each line. It also has rhymes at the end of the even number lines, and it often involved the use of parallelism or couplets that are similar in structure or meaning. The next, the second genre is Sao, which was inspired by Li Sao or Encountering Sorrow. It is a poem of lamentation and protest authored by China's first known great poet, Chu Yuan. It was an unusually long poem consisting of two parts. First is an autobiographical account that is confusion in overtones and a narration of an imagery journey undertaken by the persona. The Sao enables the poets to display their creativity of describing China's flora and fauna, both real and imaginary. It is also filled with melancholia for unrewarded virtue. The third genre is Fu. It was a poem partially expository and partially descriptive involving a single thought or sentiment, usually expressed in a reflective manner. Language ranges from the simple to rhetorical. Next is Lu Shi, or the regulation poetry. It was developed during the Tang Dynasty but has remained popular even in the present times. It is an octave consisting of five or seven syllabic verses with a definite rhyming scheme with all even lines rhyming together and the presence of the caesura in every line. The first four lines of this poem is the qing, which refers to the scene, while the remaining four lines described the qi-ing, or the emotion. Thus, emotion involves from the setting or atmosphere, and the two becomes focused, resulting in highly focused reflection of the person's loneliness, but with determination to struggle. Next is Chu Chu, or truncated poetry. It is a shorter version of the Lushi and was also popular during the Tang Dynasty. It contains only four lines, but within its 20 or 28 syllables or characters were vivid pictures of natural beauty. The last genre of Chinese poetry is Chu. It was identified with the Song dynasty. It is not governed by a fixed number of verses nor a fixed number of characters per verse. The true lyrics were sung to the tones of popular melodies. Okay, so these are the six genres of Chinese poetry. Now, questions. Okay, my turn. What genre of Chinese poetry where language ranges from simple to rhetorical? All right, very good. You did listen well. So now let's proceed with the next topic, the conventions of Chinese theater. There are four principal roles of Chinese theater. First is the Sheng, next is Tao, Qing, and Chao. The first principal roles of Chinese theater is the Xing. Xing is the prerogative of the leading actor, usually a male character, a scholar, a statesman, a warrior patriot, and the like. The next one is the Tao. The Tao plays all the women's roles. At least six principal characters are played by the female impersonator who has taken over the role after women were banned from the Chinese stage as they were looked down upon as courtesan. The next is the Qing roles, usually assigned the roles of brave warriors, bandits, crafty and evil ministers, upright judges, loyal statesmen, at times godlike and supernatural beings. Conventionally, the Qing must have broad faces and forehead suitable for the makeup patterns suggestive of his behavior. The last role is the Chow, which is the clown or jester, who is not necessarily a fool and may also do serious or evil character. He is easily recognized for the white patch around his eyes and nose, his use of colloquial language, and adeptness in combining mimicry and acrobatics. Classical Chinese play. It does not follow the unities of time, place, and action. The plot may be set in two or more places. The time element sometimes taking years to develop or end, and action containing many other subplots. There are two types of speeches: the dialogue, usually in prose, and the monologues. It also conveys an ethical lesson in the guise of art in order to impress a moral truth or a Confucian tenet. Dramas uphold virtue, condemn vice, praise fidelity, and filial piety. Since Chinese play is a total theater, it has singing, recitation verses, acrobats, dancing, and playing of traditional musical instruments because music is an integral part of the classical drama. Dramatic convention serves to identify the nature and function of each character. It has makeup, which identifies the characters and personalities. Costumes help reveal types and different colors, signify ranks and status. Property convention are rich in symbolism. A table with a chair at the side, both placed at the side of the stage, represents a hill or a high wall. Actions also reflects highly stylized movements, like hand movements may indicate embarrassment or helplessness or anguish or anger. Now, questions. Anybody? Now, my turn. What are the four principal roles of Chinese theater? Okay, very good. So now let's proceed with the literary selections of Chinese literature. The first literary selection is the Book of Songs or Shi Qing. It is considered as the oldest collection of Chinese poetry, which consists of 300 poems and was originally made of folk songs. Next is the Book of Changes or the I Ching. It is one of the five classics of Confucian philosophy and has been primarily used for divination. It, this book is based on the concept of change. The next one is 19 poems. 19 poems were anonymous poems composed in the Han Dynasty. They provide a commentary on the development of Chinese lyrical feeling, written and sung probably 1,000 years later. Next is The Dream of the Red Chamber. It is a novel made by Sauzan, a semi-autobiographical and generally considered to be the greatest of all Chinese novels. It details the decline of the Jia family, including 30 main characters and more than 400 minor ones. Next is The Injustice Done to Tongo, a play made by Guanhan Cheng. A Yuan dramatist tells the story of the poisoning of old Chang by his own son, but the conviction of Tongo for the crime. Next is Romance to the Three Kingdoms. It is the fall of the Han Dynasty and the era of the Three Kingdoms. It is based on historical figures became archetypes in popular Chinese fiction and theater. The last one is the record of the journey to the West. It is the foremost Chinese comic novel written about 1500 to 82 by the long anonymous Wu Chengyan. This novel is based on the actual 7th century pilgrimage of the Buddhist monk Xuanzang to India in search of sacred texts. Okay. So going back, the literary selections are the Book of Songs, the Book of Changes, 19 poems, Record of the Journey to the West, Dream of the Red Chamber, The Injustice Done to Tongo, and The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Now, questions. Okay, my turn. This book is considered as the oldest collection of Chinese poetry. Don't worry, guys. Those students who got the correct answer, I will give them some points. So please cooperate. Okay, thank you. Very good. Now, let's proceed with the major writers. There are three Taoist writers: Chu Wangju, Lei Chu, and Louis An. Chuangju is considered to be the most important early interpreter of the philosophy of Taoism. Lei Chu was a Taoist teacher with many philosophical differences with his forebears Lao Tzu and Chuan Chu. He argued that a sequence of causes predetermines everything that happens, including one's choice of action. Louis An was not only a Taoist scholar but the grandson of the founder of the Han Dynasty. His royal title was the Prince of Haonan. Together with philosophers and under his patronage, he produced a collection of essays on metaphysics, cosmology, politics, and conduct. Next is the next major writer is Soma Chen. He was the greatest of China's grand historians who dedicated himself to completing the first history of China, the records of the historian. His work covers almost 3,000 years of Chinese history in more than half a million written characters, each into bamboo tablets. The next writer is Po Chu. He was born 2 years after Tu Fu died, at a time when China was still in turmoil from foreign invasion and internal strife. He wrote many poems speaking bitterly against the social and economic problems that were plaguing China. Next is Li Qingchao. Li Qingchao is regarded as the China's greatest woman poet, his most liberated woman of her day, and she was trained in the arts and classical literature. Next is Chu Shu Zhen. Chu Shu Zhen has been called the father of the modern Chinese history because of his introduction of Western techniques. He also known as Lu Xun, whose stories deal with the themes of social concerns, the problems of the poor, women, and intellectuals. The next major writer whose pen name is Maotun is Shen Yanping. He is an exponent of revolutionary realism, and also he is the author of half a dozen novels, of which Midnight is considered to be his masterpiece. Next, major writers are the Tang poets. These are Wang Wei, Li Pu, and Tu Fu. Wang Wei was an 8th century government official who spent the later years of his life in the country reading and discussing Buddhism with scholars and monks. He is known for the pictorial quality of his poetry and for its economy. His word pictures are parallel Chinese brush artistry in which a few strokes are all suggestive. Next is Li Po. He was Wang Wei's contemporary and he spent a short time in courts, but seems to have been too much of a romantic and too give to drink to carry out responsibilities. He is also a Taoist, drawing sustenance from nature, and his poverty was often otherworldly and ecstatic. Next is Tofu. He is the Confucian moralist, realist, and humanitarian. He was a public spirited, and his poetry helped chronicle the history of the age, which refers to the deterioration of authority, the disaster of war, and down to the official extravagance. So there are 11 major writers. Now, do you have any questions? And now let's proceed with the Chinese poetry. The Chinese classic poetry shines like a well polished gems. Each line glistens with the poignancy of friendship or mother's enduring love or nature's beauty. However, there is a marked restraint in the use of poetic devices, as the poet draw more diction for the complication in their poems. As in the Chinese language, Chinese poems are examples of concentrated images. Subject matter is usually a commentary on a particular situation or a fact, like those written by Li Po, Wang Wei, and Tu Fu, three of the greatest master poets of the Tang Dynasty, the golden age of Chinese poetry. The, the Chinese poets are Wang Wei. He is a Chinese painter and a poet. A figure of legendary stature, is considered the founder of the pure landscape style of painting and was one of the masters of lyric verse in the Tang Dynasty. Wang's poems, which are preserved, are admired for their sensitivity to nature. So this poem are his exact. I mean, these are his poems: "The Cold Mountain" and "The Departure." Next Chinese poet is Du Fu, also known as Tu Fu. He is considered with Lipo to be one of greatest China's greatest poets of the Tang Dynasty, minor scholar official in Henan province. His early poems thread together incidents from his travels and personal accounts of hardships he endured. He also wrote poems about Lipo. Full Moon is one of his many poems. All right. The next Chinese poet is Li Po, also known as Li Bai. Li Bai is a Chinese poet and is considered one of the greatest poets in China. Li Bai composed over 1,000 poems. Nostalgia was a recurring theme in his work. He mostly wrote about the past and rarely about the future. Many poems were written from the point of view of women. Li Bai did this at a time when it was not considered appropriate for a man to write from a woman's perspective. So this is Li Bai's poem, Drinking Alone with the Moon. From a pot of wine among the flowers I drank alone. There was no one with me till raising my cup. I asked the bright moon to bring me my shadow and make us three. Alas, the moon was unable to drink, and my shadow tagged me vacantly. But still, for a while, I had these friends to cheer me through the end of spring. I sang, the moon encouraged me. I danced, my shadow tumbled after. As long as I knew we were boon companions. And then I was drunk and we lost one another. Shall goodwill ever be secure? I watched the long road of the river of stars. Alright. So, these three greatest poets of China. So, Wang Wei, Tu Fu, and Li Pu are considered to be the greatest poets of China during the Tang Dynasty. Now, questions. Raise your questions from the top till the end. Okay. Okay. To sum it up, we have learned about the historical background of China, and those are the different dynasties up to the modern world. Next is the genres of Chinese poetry. Next is the rules of Chinese theater and its convention, literary selections, and the major writers with their famous poems. If you have any clarifications, please do ask so that we will proceed with our activity. Okay, thank you. So now let's proceed with our activity. Instruction. Students will be asked to formulate an analysis of the poem Drinking Alone with the Moon by Li Po. I will give you some guide questions to help you construct an analysis of a poem easily. So these are the guide questions. First is who determined the speaker of the poem and what kind of person he is or her. To whom is the speaker speaking? Or in other words, who is the audience? Next is what are the situation and setting in time, era and place. Next is what is the purpose of the poem? State the poem's central idea or theme in a singular sentence. Then describe the structure of the poem. How does this relate to content? What is the tone of the poem? How is it how is it achieved? Next is notice the poem's diction. Discuss any words which seem especially well chosen. Next is are there predominant usages of figurative language? What is the effect? So if you will see an alliteration, simile, metaphor, then explain what is the effect of it. Then lastly, explain the use of any sound devices and whether or not they aid in conveying tone or theme. All right, these are the guide questions. And then I will give an example analysis as well so that you will have an idea. Okay, sample analysis made by Priya Cherry last February 4, 2015. Drinking Alone Under the Moon is one of Levi's signature poetries which deal with the ancient social custom of drinking. It is deemed to be a big social faux pas if one drinks alone. In this particular poem, the egoistic poet speaker creates his own companions, which are the moon and his shadow, but both seem reluctant companions, and what the poem leaves you with is a sense of despair and deep set loneliness. Levi's poetry generally contains landscape, wherein the poet speaker converses with his surroundings, much like the British romantic poet like Wordsworth or John Derbyshire. Levi's poetry generally contains landscape, wherein the poet speaker converses with his surroundings, much like the British romantic poet Wordsworth. This poem exemplifies the essential characteristics of Chinese poetry, a spontaneous expression of oneself, which is so powerful that it takes over the poet and the reader. Okay, so much for that. I will leave you to Mom How to guide you and to facilitate any of your clarifications. Okay? Then that's all for today. Thank you, students, for participating in my class and for listening to me as well. Though this is somehow boring yet interesting. Okay, okay, class, let's call it a day. Bye.